Welcome to another edition of Inside Great Lakes Sailing. My name is Greg Norm. We're lucky enough to have with us Jeff Newhoffen, who is right now the spokesman and former president of the Great Lakes Singlehanded Society. And this is a really fascinating story, Jeff, because I think it's, you've been in organization since '79, and we're going to explore the entire organization, talk to some guys on lakes, but I think it's a bigger society than people think. And certainly the difficulty of getting into the society is probably the biggest single point. But talk to us briefly about what your society is and what it means if you have an interest in getting involved.
Great Lakes Single-Handed Society was formed in 1979, basically off of a bar bet. Guys were sitting around. Yeah, one of the original founders and a couple of his buddies was sitting at a bar one night. And of course, everybody likes to go up to the North Channel in the summertime. And but the trip up and down, the wives quite often don't like to ride along with. So they wagered each other on who could get to Mackinac Island the fastest.
Okay.
I think that was probably in '78. '79 was the first event, and back then they basically followed the Michigan shoreline. I think they started with, I believe it was 17 started and 15 finished the event. And we've had the Port Huron to Mackinac race every year since. In the mid '90s, late '90s, we added the Lake Michigan event, followed by Lake Erie in the mid 2000s. A couple years later, Ontario and Superior as well. Ontario and Superior, we join with the existing events on those lakes.
The exclusivity of your organization is unbelievable. Less than, you've got more people who've been astronauts and circled the earth, and more guys have climbed Mount Everest than belong to your society. And I say that because you have to actually compete in a 200-mile or more race to get potentially to gain membership. So it's not like you can just join the club. You got to be an active participant as part of your program. Yeah,
the only way to become a member of the society is to successfully complete one of our long distance challenges. Okay. Currently, there are 360 members.
Okay. We're going to talk to a bunch of guys who have participated in getting into the specifics and the mindset and the food and all those other kind of things. But I just wanted to talk to you briefly about the organizational part of it, which I think is extraordinary. What are your dues if you do get a chance to sail one of those races? What's the dues a year?
Annual dues, I believe, are $40 now.
Okay. So this is really a sort of a badge of honor more than anything else to belong to society.
Absolutely. It's about the camaraderie, learning to safely sail single-handed in all conditions.
Does the boat size matter for your organization?
There is a minimum of 25 foot.
Okay.
There is a loose maximum of 50 foot. We haven't had anybody, I don't believe we've had anybody attempt over 50.
Okay. Jeff, how long have you been a part of the organization?
I joined, and my first event was in 2010.
Okay. So here's my question. You have a couple of smaller events. You have a lower Lake Huron that's about 45 miles. And then you have Lake St. Clair that's about 35 miles. Is that about right?
It's 39, yes.
Okay. So is that just for the guys who want to try to see if it makes sense to try the bigger one to become members?
Yeah. The Lower Huron, the St. Clair Solo, we've added another event on Lake Erie this year, the Sandusky 4505. Lake Michigan has one, I believe it's about 100 miles. It's an overnighter between Illinois, Wisconsin, and Michigan shorelines.
And my understanding too is you guys have actually a kickoff race from I think Sandusky or Put-in-Bay.
Yeah, they kind of do a spring shakedown event. It's not timed. It's no awards or anything. It's just come on out and let's go sailing for a day.
And looking at
hours, people can use it as their qualifier.
And looking at past results, I noticed that there's all kinds of boats involved in the race. I mean, there's tartan 10s that are fast. and there's really cruising boats. So is winning really, I mean, if I'm racing Port Huron to Mackinac, I'm trying to win. Is it more about finishing with your society?
It is. There is a race element to it, but the goal is to finish the event. And it's not as simple as just getting in the boat and getting to the other end.
Right.
I've completed 6 events out of 13. So
Okay.
between mechanical failures and other issues, and the reward, the real reward of getting to the other end is when they at the end of the year we have our annual meeting, and you get a bronze medallion for completing the event that year.
Oh, that's cool. My neighbor, my dock neighbor, Pat McKinnon, is part of your society. I'm not sure he's done the big races yet, but I know he's done a couple of the small ones.
Blue Moves, yeah.
Yeah. And Pat and I've been talking about this. I'm not a racer. We got involved in the sailing program to sort of raise awareness for junior sailing, because I had taken over the junior sailing program at Crescent, and it's now run to 90 shows or 91 shows. And we've obviously interviewed some serious people, but this really, for me, looks like it might be a participatory venture. That's why I wanted to have a chance to talk to you guys. I think it's you don't have to worry. I've got a submarine for a sailboat. I've got a 30 day, just a great front room sailing boat, but not a racing boat.
Right.
So that's kind of the camaraderie of this is kind of, I think, an interesting part of it. And I would think that the friendships that develop from your society, because this is really a very single-minded event, they've got to be really terrific. You meet lifelong friends, I would think, out of this.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's I don't know where my sailing prowess would go without the society.
Before we get the other guys, what is it why did you want to jump in 2010? What is it that hooked you?
I started sailing in around 2002, and that first winter, I did a lot of reading on the internet and such, and I read about the GLSS, and I turned to my wife and said, boy, this would be really cool to try someday. And it took me almost a decade to get up the courage to do it, and did the St. Clair Solo a few times, the Lower Huron a few times, and then decided to go ahead and take on the challenge of doing the Port Huron to Mac.
What's the best and the worst? What's the best of it, and what was the most difficult for you?
The best of it is getting to the island and enjoying a couple days with everybody up there, and the camaraderie, seeing the guys from Chicago. That is about the only time I get to see those guys is up there on the island. Okay. And then the worst of it is failing to finish.
Okay.
For whatever reason.
Right. I would think that would be heartbreaking to some extent.
It can be disappointing, yes.
Are you stuck with, so if you do the, say, Port Huron to Mackinac, I'm assuming, have to stay within the time frames of those races?
There is no time limit on any of the long events. I've seen people finish on Thursdays. It's not a lot of fun. That's usually a pretty slow race. And I've seen people finish on, I think this past year they were finishing on Sunday. They just went straight up the lake to the island. But generally speaking, yeah, there is no time limit on the event. Single-handed
on a boat in a storm, it's got to be a bit of a difficult process. Do people put themselves in peril by doing some of those things, or is it just the nature of the sport?
It's the nature of the event. There are lots of safety precautions that are mandatory, tethered with PLBs, EPIRBs, and such, and you're usually never far from your comrades, your friends. We talk constantly going up and down the lake, give each other advice, and are looking out for each other.
Okay.
Not to say that the problems don't happen. They do.
Right. Now, in a couple of seconds, we're going to talk to some folks and some veterans who've sailed Lake Michigan, Lake Huron, Lake Ontario, I believe, and Lake Erie.
Yes.
So we'll get into the discussion about food and sleep, because from your website, there's some information about how to sleep and the 20 minutes off, 20 minutes on. One of the very first shows we ever did, actually the second show of the series, was with John Walton Jr., who at that year had won the Trans-Superior race single-handed, which is, I'm actually doing that this year with Keith Stauber. I was asked to go along, and I guess I'm ballast more than anything else, but this Trans-Superior has got to be the most daunting, because you think of Lake Superior as obviously the more treacherous of the 5 lakes.
It's I after you mentioned that the other day, I looked it up, and it is the longest one too.
Yeah.
Except for the Ontario has a 600 that they basically lap the lake twice.
Yeah. We think of these long races as being, distance and a bit arduous and time consuming, but think about you think about the Transpac, which is, San Francisco to Hawaii, which is so it's long distance racing and single-handed long distance racing is not just, I'm not sure what I want to say, but I'll edit that out. At any rate, it sounds like it's really cool. Sounds like it's really fun. So
yeah, and I don't know if it's this year, and the guys will have to let me know. We do have a couple extremely long events, the Supermax and the Supermac and back, which get up to around 1,200 miles.
all right, well, welcome back. We're having a chance here to talk with some guys who have some Great Lake experience with the Great Lake Society, Single-Handed Society. Jeff has been nice enough to bring on board Chris Kimmons, Russ Kroc, and David Courtney. David, you are Lake Ontario. Chris, you are, just so for the audience, you are Lake Michigan.
Lake Michigan.
And Russ, you're Lake Erie, because you're a Columbus guy, right?
Yes, sir.
And then that takes care, obviously, of Jeff taking care of Lake Huron. So I think we got, other than Lake Superior, which is only every other year race, I'm assuming for you guys the same as everybody else with the Trans-Superior. Okay, that's squared. So let me just open with a very simple question for all of you. Why? Whoever wants to take that first, go ahead.
Because of the challenge of it. It's the biggest challenge I've had sailing. Not that buoy racing with 10 people on your boat isn't challenging, and not that there's a lot of other challenging you can do, but this has pushed me beyond what I ever expected. And each time it's a challenge. So each time you get to prepare, and you hope you're more prepared than the last time, and you hope you get better at it, but it never ceases to be, at times during any given event, it'll push you to the limit. And then of course the satisfaction of completing is the reward.
Chris?
Yeah, I always single-handed sailed. I pretty much started sailing big time down in Pensacola on a Hobie Cat. Just loved to just get out there and sail. I wasn't big into racing. I just loved to take that across that big, beautiful bay and really enjoy myself. Later on, I had a Contest 27. Always sailed that by myself. Then I found out I had this boat in Houston, actually, and found out I was moving to Chicago, and read up about the lakes and saw this Great Lakes Single-Handed Society and said, I want one of those plaques. So moved up to Chicago in 2012, did my first race in 2014.
David?
I often still ask myself that question, especially 3 o'clock in the morning when you're beating up wind with 20 knots and you could be home in bed. I think, why am I here? And then the morning breaks and it's a gorgeous day and things are running along nice. You got a few guys behind you, maybe 2 guys ahead of you. And you think, this is what I want to be doing. It's, I can't think of too many other things. I used to ride a lot of motorcycle, and I rode across Canada pretty much by myself. Guess I enjoy time alone, and I like the competitive, the little bit of edginess to the whole thing. And you're a little bit out there. I've always been a bit strange, so this confirms it, especially with most of my friends. And I can't think of something that gets my adrenaline going in the middle of the winter more than thinking about getting out there and sailing across the lake.
Okay. Well, let me start with the first category that I'm just curious just to get some reaction from you guys. Is this an event or a race? And I say that, is it competitive? And is the competitiveness with yourself or worrying about being first across the line? Because this is not a typical sailing event, a typical regatta. I think it has a different parameters. I think, is that fair to say?
Yes.
We call it a challenge.
Okay.
And distinct from, a race, I guess you could say, in a lot of regards, although it's still competitive. I mean, it's not a rally. We're out there, we want to win. I would say all of us feel that way. And it doesn't, the whole spectrum of boats, from my 80s minivan style Pearson 303 to Russ's Shock 35, we're all out there to sail as best we can and to be as competitive as we can. But there's a lot of, and you even see this in all the solo races, I would say, even like the Golden Globe right now. It's just a band of brothers out there too. I mean, we're communicating, helping each other, supporting each other through this whole event. And it's a great experience.
Russ, you're kind of shaking your head. Is it more, I'm not saying you're not competitive, but is it less competitive for you, or is it more about the event?
Oh, no, my competitive nature got me in trouble early on in a few of the races. And the one thing that I think everybody learns is there's race mode and then there's finish mode. And I think at the beginning, everybody's kind of in race mode. I would say almost everyone out there is competitive. They're doing everything they can do to go along as quickly as they can, sail as efficiently as they can. But issues arise, not the least of which are sleep or lack of sleep. Sometimes your autopilot's not working right. Sometimes the weather's against you. And at a certain point in the race, most races, you kind of switch from 100% competitive mode to, I just want to finish this thing.
Right.
And depending on the event, depending on what issues you might have, you may be able to stay in close to that race mode till the end. Other times you might have issues the first morning and you back off a little bit and say, I'm just going to finish this, because like Chris said, it's a challenge and finishing it is the goal. However, we argue about ratings and we argue about what class we're in, and we're out to get a flag too.
Okay.
But we try to balance that with being safe and finishing the event.
David?
Yeah, I would certainly echo all of that. And many times I've gone into survival mode, and again, finishing was the goal. In hindsight, there's one event that I didn't finish, and that was, everything had mounted up where it just made it a whole lot. There was 20 things against me and nothing really there other than the finish. And I decided this was a better seaman thing to do, was to find safe harbor, and I did that. But the drive to finish, and of course, a lot of us are able to see trackers while we're out there. And if you can see you're gaining on someone, that's going to light you up and maybe get you out of survival mode back into race mode sometimes. And the competitiveness is definitely there, But it has to be safety first, because you can't win anything crossing the line without without your own safety.
So the old joke that if there's two sailboats on the lake,
Yeah.
they race, and one of them knows they're racing, even though the other guy might not, still holds true. And so my question, Jeff, to you would be, in the group, does the better sailor, is it obvious to the group as who might be a better sailor, or is it more boat based, or is it just the camaraderie of everybody enjoying the process?
For the most part, it's the camaraderie. The challenge to finish the race drags you in, but the camaraderie that you get with the group brings you back we have guys who have done races on all 5 lakes, completed them, and you get the same group and a growing group with every event, and it's the camaraderie is what brings you back.
Okay. All right, let me get some specifics. Let's talk first about sleep, or lack of it, within that race. I'm looking at what I think is an older set of gentlemen involved in a competitive process. And I say that because sailing is one of the few events, in doing this show, the 90 some odd shows we've done now, it's become pretty obvious to me that it's unlike any other sport. And my point to it is you can be a competitive international level sailor at the age of 50. That's not true in almost any other sport. So the zealousness at which you come at it is a little bit different than other sports, because if you played high school football, you're probably not spending time with the NFL guys, that kind of an approach to things. So from a sleep perspective, I noticed on your website, there was this sort of 20 minutes on, 20 minutes off. And I'm sure it's as different for every person there is thought, but is sleep an issue for this? And is that something you actually work at? Maybe you can give me your individual, how you approach it individually.
Well, the 20-minute cycle works best for most people. Some it depending upon how competitive you are, you don't get that first night done very well, and therefore it catches up to you later on, say in Sunday. But I find that by the time Saturday midnight or so, the first day midnight rolls around, you're ready for some rest, and the boats have separated to a degree, so that and again, we have trackers and AIS and everything to keep track of where we're at in relationship with everybody else on the lake. So and boat moving along at 5 knots doesn't cover a lot of ground in 20 minutes.
Right. Chris, what are your techniques?
Well, I do the 20 minutes as well. There's a Greg Stampy who is sleep their researcher, has done a lot of work with what they call polyphasic sleep. And you don't want to sleep too long because your brain gets into a mode where it's hard to get back out of that sleep. So about 20 minutes works, but it's situational. I mean, there's times you can get 20 minutes, pop your head out of the companionway, go right back down and get right back into REM sleep. I don't know if you're familiar with Webb Childs, the first American to sail solo around Cape Horn. Since then, he's done 6 other circumnavigations, matches the number of marriages he has, but I digress. But anyway, a couple times he's found himself either floating for 24 hours or bumping along with a swamped sailboat across a coral reef. And the one thing that he's found is that there's 2 things your body needs. One, it can't do without. Food it can do without, but water and sleep are the 2 things that your body's going to force you to do. So you have to manage that fatigue.
Okay. So I'm guessing, Russ, that discipline and being a single-handed sailor in this situation, especially the bigger races, it's got to be pretty obvious. You got to be disciplined and stay to a schedule and be as rigid as possible. Is that fair to be successful?
Yeah. Sleep is safety. You need to sleep to stay safe. And that's the number one goal, is that everybody's safe and everybody completes the event. So, and that's something you learn as you do more challenges, as you learn how to manage your sleep. And pretty much the rule is, at least for me, is if I can sleep, in other words, conditions allow, the boat's doing good, there's no traffic around, you need to try and at least rest, if not sleep. And even if you're not tired early on the first day or the first night, just relaxing and laying down and taking the weight off for a few minutes will help you in the future. So that really, it's what everybody talks about. It's a great question. And that really is the most difficult thing to learn, because it's nothing that you've ever really had to do before.
Russ, how much time do you spend in a cockpit sleeping versus down in the, below deck?
If I almost sleep below deck almost all the time.
Okay.
I make up a bunk on either settee, or I switch it one side or the other. I sleep on the leeward side below. You're in the middle of the boat. It's quieter. There's not so much motion. Not to say you don't fall asleep on deck once in a while, but if I'm planning to go sleep for 20 minutes, and Chris is exactly right. If things are going good, you can sleep for 20 minutes, pop your head up, check your instruments, look at the AIS, and sometimes within 30 seconds or a minute, maybe swing the binoculars around, you're back down to sleep again, and you can put together 6 or 8 20-minute segments and feel like you got some good rest and you did some recovery there.
David, as I've talked to friends about Single-Handed Society, and he's certainly about this story, I keep having friends remind me of the Robert Redford movie where he goes down and sleeps, obviously gets run over. If you watch that movie with the hole in the side of the boat, every possible mistake you can make as a sailor, they made in that script. But my point to it is, how many people really don't have any clue about racing and single-handed racing as in terms of, because, obviously you're wearing tethers, you're doing those things that make it safe, but is there a lot of misconception about single-handed racing as far as you're concerned?
Well, you don't want to watch that movie.
That's for sure.
That'll drive you mad for sure. Yeah, there's misconceptions, of course, because I guess if you've only ever sailed with 4 or 5 other people on your boat, and you got this feeling that you've always got to be glued to the horizon. Well, we know, like I said, 5 knots, you don't cover a lot of distance. Even at 7 or 8 knots, you're not covering that much distance. And today I wouldn't sail without AIS. I'm not going to race alone without AIS. That's just the one tool that I find is indispensable. And once you've got that, the first day, you're going to get the feeling of the boat. The second day, you're going to be tired enough to sleep with the boat, and the boat will wake you up if something's amiss in that 20 minutes. But the sailing alone part, it's a practice because every time I go out there, the first day, as Jeff said, you're getting accustomed to that motion. You're down below, you're trusting your autopilot, it's a whole trust thing. And once you've learned to have a little bit of trust, then you can catch a little bit of sleep. And, and I don't ever feel dangerous. I don't ever feel that it's a threat to my life or anything like that. If I felt any of that, I would say, no, this is not for me. But I probably feel safer there than I do on the busy, crazy highways around here. That's for sure.
Any sort of peril stories that you had? Is there anybody's got a recognition of something that you ran into something, or there was some kind of a difficult situation you learned from?
Every race has its challenge. The last couple Port Huron Mackinaws have turned really nasty at the end, where we were beating into 35 knots through the straits, and unfortunately, that was my last 2 incompletes. But and I believe last year Michigan got beat up. Was it last year, Chris, or the year before?
Year before.
Year before, where practically took out the entire fleet.
All but 3 boats.
The weather was that bad. It's usually weather is the biggest impediment.
David made a mention of you're more dangerous on the roads. One of the Trans Superior winners, John Welton Jr., had, I think 2 years ago, had a demasting that was pretty critical. And he brought the boat back, and we saw the pictures, and John was just down the dock from where I'm at. And I was really surprised at the damage that was created. I'm not sure, but I think he had turned into the wind, or it snapped. He's got an Express 27, and it was a pretty severe accident. He had to be pulled in by the Coast Guard, if I'm not mistaken. And so things do happen, but that just goes with the nature. So the question then becomes, you're doing the, Port Huron to Mac. It starts blowing 40. Do you go into shore, or do you just keep sailing and just reef it down?
Go ahead, Jeff.
Tried to do it both ways. Neither one worked for me.
Stay away from the lee shore.
Yeah.
Yes. You're better.
Yeah, I've ended up having to do both or either, where I've just had to run back down away from a storm, and other times I've just bailed out into an anchored, which we're allowed to do as long as we don't get any assistance.
Okay. Let me switch gears a little bit. We know that from athletics, and certainly in the professional level, that nutrition is a huge part of that ability to stay awake. And Chris, I think you mentioned that water and sleep are the 2 things that the body cannot be deprived of. Talk a little bit about nutrition and how seriously you take it or don't. And what is it that you typically would eat in a 48 to 72 hour period?
I tend to forget to eat, and that's a big problem for me. And something that I've had to really work at is to make sure that I expend the energy to get up and fix something to eat, because that energy really has to be there. But I'm continuously grazing peanuts, a lot of high protein stuff through the day. And then I try to make sure that I get at least 2 hot meals. Nothing real special. I mean, I don't do freeze dried. I just do cans mainly, instead of having to transfer boiling water or whatever. And just, 1 saucepan meal kind of thing is how I do it.
Chris, you're gonna have to share that idea that I don't know how to, I just forget about eating. That would be helpful at Thanksgiving. So I get that part. Russ, what's your favorite? Is it bologna sandwiches, or what do you feast on?
No, Chris is right. You can get tired to where you don't feel like making something to eat or even thinking about what to eat. But obviously that's almost as important as the sleep and the water. So yeah, I do a lot of snack stuff, high calorie, high protein stuff. But I also, I do eat some Mountain House. I do eat some freeze dried stuff, but I will take eggs and onions and bacon. And there are some trips or some events where, it's noon and it's calm and the boat's doing great. And I'll go down below for an hour and start chopping up onions and make a nice meal. And that's kind of special. That doesn't happen every race, but if you can do that, that really gives me a big bump in energy. And so I do a little bit of everything, I guess. I don't have a plan. It just kind of happens based on conditions and based on what I think I need.
David?
I take several, usually more food than I need, because you never know. I'm always optimistic that I'm going to eat like 4 times a day, and I don't. But there's always 3 or 4 hot meals, and if I'm doing a longer race, like sometimes I do the 600, I'll take enough food for 6 days, and there's going to be at least 6 or 8 hot meals that are pre-prepared. And I'm one of the only guys that sails with a barbecue on, so I put everything on the barbecue, and if it's a pre-packed takeaway tinfoil package, just stick that on there, and in 20 minutes, I got a piping hot meal right in the cockpit. Always make sure I take a picture and send it to my friends so that they can be jealous or hungry. And never go sailing without a dozen boiled eggs, because you can have a feast 2 o'clock in the morning. The weather's bad. You're not sure what to do. You're hungry. A couple of those quick milkshakes and a couple of eggs with some salt and pepper. Boy, you can satisfy a great hunger. You got some protein. It's quick. You can do it anywhere. And sometimes I've had to rely on that for a day or so just to keep you going. And then lots of trail mix, high protein, stuff like that.
David, you mentioned you have a barbecue on the back of your boat, which I think is terrific. Obviously, the club I belong to, if you had a barbecue on the back of your boat, you get laughed off the dock. But there was some.
Yeah, that happens to me all the time.
There were some non-suches last year that were, rail meat for the race, and one of the guys decided to just put up his Dodger and go across the line, and everybody else looked like they'd been spent. They'd been out on the rail for a couple of days, and the guy that put up the Dodger and the Bimini kind of went across the line, sipping cocoa. And at that point, the finish didn't really matter, but the guy who had the luxury of having gotten out of the weather, everybody else was jealous of him. So sometimes you have to do something to survive. Jeff, how difficult is it in really inclement weather? Is this, and I don't want to say fear, I'm not sure that's exactly the right word, but apprehension, does that come into play as part of this race?
Usually the inclement weather slowly builds. It doesn't really hit you real hard. You see it coming across the lake and you got time to prepare for it, but not always. We've gotten gusts up to, I can remember a Port Huron race a couple, 3 years ago where we were sailing along with almost no wind, and all of a sudden it went up to 30 knots, and half the fleet just went chasing the wind just to get their sails down. You manage it just like everything else. I mean, that's one of the, it's part of the challenge. You need to be prepared at all times for all conditions, and it can be frustrating sitting there for 45 minutes in a thunderstorm, just waiting for it to pass, or or beating into it at 30 knots and saying, come on, this got to start letting down pretty soon. And it can be frustrating, but for the most part, you're just working to keep yourself and your boat in one piece during those
Chris,
campaigns.
to Chris, Russ, and David, is apprehension a better word than maybe fear?
Due regard is how I'd put it. What I like to do, especially, I see that squall line coming at me. I put on a little bit of yacht rocks and a little mellow music, get on my foul weather gear and just try to zen it a little bit and just wait for it. It's not like it's a monster. Weather is what it is. It's not sentient. Deal with it and understand, the situation you're going to be in. Do you need to, go bare pole, for instance, start to really evaluate these things. That's how I approach it.
So like maybe a stunt man would approach a stunt. It's not just jumping off the edge of the cliff. It's timed and figured out and
Yeah.
and studied. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. Keep it as
Makes sense.
dispassionate as you can.
Okay. The reason I asked the question is that your sailing ability comes into that question. And do you have guys that are maybe not as equipped to sail in those conditions that come aboard the first time, for especially some of the shorter races, or are most of the guys in the society really we'd all consider them to be expert sailors?
I don't know about expert, but there are there are a number of things that we have to do. We just don't show up and go sailing. There's some qualifications to join. There's recommendations from others. So the folks who show up and actually are authorized by GLSS to start a challenge, we know that their resume, this is not their first rodeo. So they're out there. They've put themselves through some paces before, and I think we if we didn't feel confident that somebody could finish a race, I think we'd ask them to come back next year after a few more lines on the resume.
Okay, Russ, I'm just curious, Russ.
Yeah, there is some bars, and there is a process where the board of directors reviews resumes and sailing, and you do have to do an event by yourself, at least 24 hours, at least 100 miles, log it, send it in. And we don't approve them all. There's some that we ask follow-up questions and ask them to maybe go out and do the overnight again and document it a little better or whatever. But yeah, even if you're not necessarily a great sailor, all we really want is people to be safe out there. And that's our main concern. They don't have to go fast. They can there's really no time limit to it. You don't have to race at all. Just be safe out there. And if you complete it, great. If not, be safe and come back next year.
Is there any correlation between a solo sailor and liking spending time with yourself? And are you guys generally quiet? Is there a personality type that's attracted to solo sailing versus something else having to spend time? And all of you are looking up off to your right, which means you're contemplating the question. Jeff, you certainly were. So is it the panacea of personalities, or is it really sort of the quiet and introspective kind of guy that gets involved in this?
No, you'll find the personalities from A to Z.
Okay.
From Dave Evans to Russ.
Yeah.
A lot of characters.
Yeah, we got characters.
A lot of characters.
Yeah. And I think a lot of first timers, a lot of racers that, have come in from the Max and stuff, they're really surprised about how much we communicate with each other. That's real consistent. That's a real consistent comment that, man, you guys talk to each other a lot. And it's like, yeah, the chatter on VHF it can be continuous. As we talk to each other, maybe help each other through problems and things. So I would say that across that spectrum of personalities, the camaraderie is something that you don't see in the crude races.
Most of Chris's friends say that are non-solo yet, say that when they grow up, they want to be like Chris. Because everybody wants to be a solo racer, but they're not really sure. They don't want to approach the subject with their wife just yet.
Right.
A lot of people have a desire to be that, to get out there and do it. And one thing and another holds them back for whatever that is, but it helps to be a little bit crazy, and you got to enjoy time alone. But I'm certainly not an introvert. I'm just the opposite. Put me in front of 10 people and I can't shut up ever.
Okay. Well, no, and I get that. Is it then that time? Is this the, the guy who picks up, he's 39 years old and decides that he wants to start running a marathon? Is this your warrior moment in the life of a 12-month sailor? This is your sort of Super Bowl kind of thing. It's a really more personal challenge than it is against maybe the guys you're sailing with.
Yeah,
Fair estimation.
I'm going to say yes.
Okay. Why?
I'm already planning. Like I've already tacked a few times and set the spinnaker numerous times in the past 2 months. Just getting my mind wrapped around. I was about to start reviewing my track from last year just to see how it all went.
Would it be fair to say that most of you are somewhat obsessive compulsive kind of personalities because of this kind of thing? Type A's, for lack of a better term.
Well, nobody
My
wants to
wife's
admit.
behind me and says that.
Nobody wants to admit that.
No, listen, I get that part. I'm asking the question because I'm a type A. That's why I'm attracted to potentially trying to do this. But I just find it really interesting what pushes you and what buttons, and this is a really hard process. Sailing a boat 600 miles, 235 miles, 320 miles, whatever it might be. I have great admiration for what you guys do because it's not every day. And I'm not looking at a screen of a bunch of, 25-year-old Olympic level athletes. I'm not suggesting that you're not, this is a really terrific endeavor. And I think sometimes it gets lost in the landscape of sailing because you don't have the publicity that maybe it deserves. And again, I'm speaking from the outside, but I have great admiration for what you guys do. And I'm not sure everybody else does other than the guys within the group. And that's a shame because it's really, Pat talks to me all the time about the small little 30-miler he did. His head's lit up. He wants to do bigger races next year. So that's kind of why we're having this conversation. David, you mentioned one. Go ahead, David. I'm sorry.
In our racing on Lake Ontario, it's even more noticeable, I think, because it's not just a solo event. We're on the start line with, I've had as many as 120 boats starting behind me, and the solo guys go a half an hour before the rest of the fleet just to get us out of the way and out front. And so there you are, you got 100 or 80 or 60, whatever boats there in the skipper's meeting. And of course, there's all kinds of cracks and jokes about the solo guys who have no friends and all of this stuff. But what I find is there's so many of those guys that someday they're going to do a solo like yourself. And they're full of questions. Why, how, where, how long are you going to do this for? And I said, well, I gotta do 1 600 after I turn 70 because I've only got 2 600 medallions and I have 3 kids. So I got to leave them at least one each.
I love that.
So and you said, but if you're type A, you have personal goals. You have personal horizons that you want to conquer, for whatever crazy reason, just because it's there with some one man's reason. So, and some of it is because it's there. It can. I'm still able. Why not? And as long as I can, I will.
Jeff, you mentioned there was 300 and some odd members roughly at this point.
360, I believe.
360. You guys have, I think, 9 races, give or take? Does that sound about right?
There's this year, I believe there's 9 events on the calendar. Yeah.
Okay. How many of that 360 membership it ends up racing in those 9 events? Is there a core group of 25, 30 guys that you see every week or every race?
Yeah, there is we remember the 360 members date all the way back to 1979.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah. So
Some
there
of those
is a
guys-
core group, and I would say it's more like 50 to 70, somewhere in that range of participation because of the, all 5 lakes involved. Not everybody goes to every event. It's just not possible.
There's a YouTube video of a gentleman, I think maybe 2 or 3 years ago. Anyway, the gist of the video is he ran the Lake Erie race.
Mm-hmm.
And when he came in last, there was 20 guys on the dock waiting for him.
Yeah,
And the gist of that video was he was shocked because he just assumed that it was almost like the new guy at school. You know, he's out there by himself and everybody went home. And then it was actually, you know, you think about watching YouTube videos, and it was really kind of fun to watch because there's people walking out and, you know, they helped him dock his boat. You know, somebody had a beer and off they went. And that's kind of sailing in its essence, whether it's, you know, local two-handed Monday night beer hand can or a 600-mile race you guys do. And that's the uniqueness part of this sport from that standpoint. So,
like we say, a lot of it is camaraderie.
okay. Is there anything I'm missing? Is there anything that? No,
I'd say just, you know, you were talking about how do you cope? Yeah, I've got the highest perf on Lake Michigan. And so I tend to get left behind. A lot of times people have done a horizon job on me. I'm sure it's not my abilities. It's got to be the boat, but I digress. Anyway, the whole point is the discipline to keep the boat moving, or like on the super maximum backs, it's the same way where nobody's around you. Really, it's to the point where you're not communicating. You got to keep the boat moving. You've got to take care of yourself. And that's that inner discipline that you really got to tap into and just develop. And that goes to that whole essence of the challenge.
I'm a college lacrosse coach, and I have a T-shirt that I wear that I from this conversation. I mentioned earlier what kind of personalities, but on my T-shirt when I talk to my parents, it's sarcasm is my religion. And I want to share that saying with you, and I want to give you guys some of those T-shirts because I think in this group, sarcasm at the end of the race, I would think would go a long ways. It's that ribbing that comes with the camaraderie that you develop that can only happen in something that everybody has the same love for. And I think that's the terrific part. So, anything go ahead, David.
If I would have a closing remark, the hardest part is getting to the start line. After that, it's just a joy.
Right.
Trying to get all that prep done, and most of the time you're on your own there as well. Well, you're probably on your own even if you have crew, but it makes it easier when you don't have crew because you know you're supposed to be on your own. But you get your boat to the start line, you get everything done, you make sure it's safe, you go over it 1,000 times, and once that gun's gone and you've crossed the line, it's hallelujah freedom from there because you're doing it now, and it's good times then.
Any last thoughts either for Chris, David, or Jeff? Russ?
I just add that if somebody watches this and they're interested, they can email on the website there, solosailors.org, I think.
.org,
find it. Okay. That goes to the board of directors, and we've been making a habit of assigning or finding someone local to kind of guide this person along. And if they're a candidate for what we do, if they want to join, we're there to help with the process, because it is a process and it can take a year or two before you're even ready to do your first event. So,
Okay. Chris, any words of wisdom?
I agree with Russ. First of all, the water's fine. Come join us. This is I think it's a band of brothers and a few sisters, and everybody's really fast friends, and everybody shares the common goal of what we do. We know it's special amongst ourselves, I think, and anybody's welcome. Got the boat. As Russ said, you jump through the bar. You got the minimum requirements. Come on, we're not a cliquey bunch at all.
One of the things when we started the interview, Jeff got up and went and got his medallion that you apparently get at the end of the race. And David, you alluded to the fact you got to have another one for your 3 kids on the 600-mile parson. It's crazy, but something as small as the medallion it does matter. So it becomes, important. Chris, you're the current president of the society. Am I
Yes.
mistaken? Okay. Jeff, any words of wisdom?
Well, I don't really have much wisdom, but I would encourage those interested to check out the website. There's a lot of information on there, preparation information, and as well as contact the society to see if somebody in your neighborhood is already a member and can kind of help direct you.
Okay. Well, I'm actually doing the Trans-Superior with a guy who from Keith Stauber, who's the actually PHRF handicap.
We'll have to get you out to the St. Clair Solo this fall.
Yeah, we'll have to definitely do that. Guys, I appreciate your time, and it's been really terrific in having the opportunity to talk with you, and hopefully we can, our paths will cross before the summer's out. So thanks again for your time, guys.
Thank you.
Greg.
That's awesome. Thank you very much.